Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hello everyone, welcome to the second part of our two-part class on the Isa Upanishad, specifically focusing on Sri Aurobindo's very different and new approach to this amazing Vedantic scripture. Some of you, many of you, I assume, are familiar with this opening mantra that I recited, Purnamadav Purnamidam, right? From the Purna comes the Purna, and so on. Even when you subtract the Purna from the Purna, Purna remains. Purna means what? Fullness, or the whole. And I think it's not a coincidence that some scholars have called Sri Aurobindo's philosophy Purna Advaita. Purna Advaita, which means an integral Advaita. I like in English the term integral Advaita. It's an all-encompassing oneness. It's a oneness that doesn't exclude anything. And we're going to find that Sri Aurobindo interprets the Isa Upanishad as teaching an Advaitic doctrine, but not the classical Advaita, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, but an all-encompassing oneness, an integral Advaita, a Purna Advaita that accepts the reality of not just of non-dual Brahman, but also of Shakti and all names and forms and all individual souls as well. Last time we discussed his methodology, which is to adopt a new approach to understanding the Isa Upanishad in the light of the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, especially Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on Vijnana, what's called the spiritual state of Vijnana. And we discussed primarily mantras 1 and 2. There's no way we can discuss all 18 mantras. So I thought what I would like to do for today, in the little time we have, is to focus on mantras 7 through 14, some of the most important mantras in the Upanishad, and speaking specifically of 9 through 14, these two triads, 9 through 11 and 12 through 14, some of the most cryptic verses, some of the most cryptic mantras. They're extremely difficult to interpret, and I thought Sri Aurobindo gives such an interesting interpretation that I think we should really think deeply about it and think for ourselves. So without any further ado, let's look at mantra 7 first. Let me read you the Sanskrit and then Sri Aurobindo's translation. Yasmin sarvani bhutani atmaiva bhut vijanataha tatra ko mohaka shoka ekatvam anupashyataha. He in whom it is the self-being that has become all existences that are becoming. For he has the perfect knowledge. How shall he be deluded? Whence shall he have grief, who sees everywhere oneness? Okay. This mantra is remarkable, and Sri Aurobindo's interpretation is even more remarkable in a way. He's the only commentator I'm aware of who interprets this mantra and actually the entire Upanishad from the standpoint of Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual experience of Vijnana. Sorry, can somebody whose audio is on, could they please mute their audio? I think it might be, I don't know whose it is, but whoever it is, please, everybody keep your audio on mute, please. Thank you. Okay, so Sri Ramakrishna, this is what Sri Ramakrishna has to say about the Vijnani's realization of oneness. This is taken from the handout for class 3 of 3 in my 3-part class. Sri Ramakrishna says the following: the Bhakta also has a realization of oneness. He sees that there is nothing but God. Instead of saying that the world is unreal like a dream, he says that God has become everything. In a wax garden, everything is wax, but in various forms. Bhaktaro ekakar gyan hoy. সে দেখে ঈশ্বর ছাড়া আর কিছুই নেই, স্বপ্নবৎ বলে না, তবে বলে তিনিই সব হয়েছেন, মোমের বাগানে সবই মোম, তবে নানা রূপ. This is from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Now, there are a few things that I want to bring to your attention in this very important mantra. Number one, look at the Sanskrit. Yasmin sarvani bhutani atma eva abhut vijanataha. Okay. that great sage who knows, who has the perfect knowledge, Vijanataha. Notice that I don't know how many of you in the audience know Sanskrit, but this word Vijanataha is very interesting, okay? Because it is the, I don't know what the exact English grammatical phrase would be for this. It would be like participial, I think. It is the participial form of the word Vijnana, the noun Vijnana, okay? So Vijnana, but in the form of knowing perfectly, or having the perfect knowledge that what? That all beings, that the Atman, the self being, has become all beings. Okay. Which means what? Sri Aurobindo is highlighting the fact that this word Vijanataha is really, it stems from Vijnana, that this is the perfect spiritual knowledge talked about by Sri Ramakrishna. It's a vision of oneness, ekatvam. Notice the term also, the second to last term in the second line. Ekatvam. Ekatvam anupashyataha. Oneness. Ekatvam means oneness. So the Vijnani is the one who has this extraordinary, ecstatic spiritual realization of the oneness of everything and everyone in the universe, and sees Brahman as having become all beings. And another thing to keep in mind here, Bhutani, the word Bhutani means beings. That's the meaning of Bhutani. But etymologically, the verbal root of Bhutani is bhu, which means to become. So what Sri Aurobindo is pointing to is that he says, even etymologically, the word Bhutani has a deep spiritual significance. The Vijnani is the one who sees that the one infinite divine reality has actually become all the different beings in this world. Does that make sense? So Bhutani itself means becoming. Becomings of what? Becomings of the one infinite divine. Okay? So I think that Sri Aurobindo really brilliantly interprets this mantra from the standpoint of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on Vijnana, his Vijnana Vedanta, that the Vijnani has a realization of oneness, but it's not a oneness that excludes the reality of this world. It's not Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Instead, Sri Ramakrishna uses this beautiful metaphor of wax. He says in a wax garden, everything is wax, but in various forms. Notice what he's saying. This is so different from the rope snake analogy, which is favored by Shankara and his followers. Rope snake suggests that what I'm seeing as a snake is actually a rope. There was never any snake. The snake is just an illusory appearance. But now notice the wax garden. Everything is wax. There's nothing but wax in this entire garden. And yet, all of the names and forms in the garden are actually real manifestations of wax. They're different formations of the same wax. The wax elephant, the wax tree, the wax plants, right? But they're all actually wax, which means it's a different paradigm actually for thinking about this world. The world is not a dream. It's not an illusory appearance. All the different names and forms in this world are real manifestations of the same infinite divine reality. Interestingly, Swami Vivekananda, whose work Sri Aurobindo read carefully, in his lecture, God and Everything, which is a really interesting, innovative interpretation of the Isa Upanishad, Swamiji interprets this line in that way. Let's read Swamiji's understanding of Mantra 7. This is also on the handout, just below the quotation I read. Swamiji says, when all life and the whole universe are seen in this Atman, then alone man has attained the secret. There is no more delusion for him. Where is any more misery for him who sees this oneness in the universe? This is another great theme of the Vedanta, this oneness of life, this oneness of everything. If you go below the surface, you find that unity between man and man, between races and races, high and low, rich and poor, gods and men and animals. If you go deep enough, all will be seen as only variations of the one. And he who has attained to this conception of oneness has no more delusion. What can delude him? So notice, at least I see this. When Swamiji says all will be seen as only variations of the one, I don't see any hint that these variations are unreal or that they're illusory appearances. I think he's following his guru, Sri Ramakrishna, in thinking of this entire world of names and forms as a kind of wax garden. They're different real manifestations of the same divine one. So you see oneness because you see everything as God. And finally, look at the last bullet point on the same handout. Sri Aurobindo, I think really interestingly says that the Isha Upanishad definitely teaches Advaita. It teaches an Advaita philosophy, but he contrasts two different kinds of non-duality. Okay? He contrasts what he calls the illusionist Advaita Vedanta of Shankara and his followers with what he calls the synthetic or comprehensive Advaita of the Isha Upanishad. What does he mean by comprehensive non-dualism? Let's read what he says. He says, the Isha Upanishad does not teach a pure and exclusive monism. It declares the one without denying the many, and its method is to see the one in the many. The ensemble of these ideas is consistent only with a synthetic or comprehensive, as opposed to an illusionist or exclusive monism. Okay, what do you think he means? Now, I want this to be interactive. So now, I don't want this to turn into a huge thing, but let me ask a question for anybody who's able to answer it. What do you think Sri Aurobindo means by illusionist or exclusive monism? And why is he contrasting that with what he calls a synthetic or comprehensive monism? And why does he think the Isha Upanishad teaches a synthetic or comprehensive monism? So anyone want to take a stab at this? What is this contrast he's setting up between illusionist or exclusive monism and synthetic or comprehensive monism?
So I think, and what he's trying to say he says clay in a pot. But if he looks at the pot and he says there was never a pot to begin with, it has only been clay all over. So that is kind of exclusion, right? But if I say clay in a pot and I say pot is filled with clay, I mean, it's not filled with clay, but it's made of clay.
It is clay, yeah.
It is clay. And so that is what he's talking about, I think. So if I dismiss the pot completely and say there was never a pot to begin with, it's always just been clay, that is the contrast, I think. I think that's what he's trying to do.
I think you're on the right track. Yeah, I think that's helpful, bringing in that metaphor of clay and pots. See, there are two words used to describe classical Advaita Vedanta of Shankara. First word is illusionist. I think he's thinking here of the rope snake analogy, which Shankara loved, right? Which is that this rope that I think I see is an illusion. It never existed. Now, with the metaphor you use, which is from the Chandogya Upanishad, right? The clay forming into pots. Does it make sense to say that these pots, these differently shaped and sized pots, are illusory appearances of clay? What do you think?
When somebody makes me mad, I like to think that. I'm just telling you the truth.
Okay. Well, okay, that's a separate thing, but I'm just talking about just from the standpoint of common sense. You have a bunch of clay pots in front of you.
Right.
Does it make sense to say that these clay pots are illusory appearances of clay, or that they're manifestations of clay?
Manifestations make sense.
Right. So now I think this is the contrast that Sri Aurobindo is drawing. He's saying that whereas classical Advaita defends or posits or upholds an illusionist Advaita, an illusionist monism, which means this whole world of names and forms is an illusory appearance superimposed, mistakenly superimposed upon the one reality, which is what? Non-dual pure consciousness. In the same set, for the same reason, it's also an exclusive monism. Exclusive because what? Exclusive in the sense of, not in the sense of, like, what's the Saks Avenue? Not Saks. I'm not good with fashion. What is the Saks or Fifth Avenue? Saks Fifth Avenue, right? Isn't that like a very big fashion brand among women? And okay, all right. Anyway, very expensive high-end fashion stores, right? They're exclusive, but not in that sense. This is exclusive in the sense of excluding. It's an Advaita that excludes what? The reality of the personal God and the reality of the names and forms in this world and the reality of individual souls, jivatmas. That's how I take Sri Aurobindo. That's how I see him defining exclusive monism. Shankara's Advaita Vedanta is exclusive in saying Brahma Satyam, Shakti Mithya, Jagat Mithya, Jivas Mithya at the end of the day. But go ahead, yeah.
Maharaj, I have one question. So when I was in the retreat last year, Swami Sarvapriyananda he had a very good reason as to why this is called an illusion, right? Because this is another reality. And how will this reality be able to, what's the word he used? I forget. as names and forms, we are in another reality, right? And this is a different reality, the ultimate, the absolute. So how would one interact with another? It has to be an illusion in order to have that interaction or something like that.
Right.
And
Yeah. Okay. Let it be. I mean, the thing is that logic
so
is the
logically it
logic
makes
of
sense.
classical Advaita Vedanta, right? Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So
Just finish your
logically
question.
makes sense as to something that is totally absolute. It's interacting with something that is changing all the time,
Right.
and one is superimposed on the other.
Right.
So it logically makes sense too.
Yeah, it logically makes sense from the standpoint of the logic of exclusive monism. You see, the logic he's giving is the logic of exclusive monism. Now, let me contrast that with the logic of what Sri Aurobindo calls synthetic or comprehensive monism. Let's take the metaphor you brought up from the Chandogya Upanishad, clay and pots, right?
Right.
Now, imagine there's a potter, right? He's got a giant vat of formless clay in a big vat.
Mm-hmm.
He is shaping differently shaped and different sizes of pots. Let's say 5. He places them on a table next to that vat. There's still a lot of formless clay in the pot, and they're in the vat. Okay, and then there are these 5 differently shaped pots made of the same clay. They're next to each other. Now, isn't it perfectly reasonable and sensible to say that these 5 pots, which are on the table next to this vat of formless clay, they are nothing but clay. They're nothing but that same clay that's in the vat, and yet that they are real. Just think about it. Your own analogy, right? Mm-hmm. Your own metaphor. So that's the idea, is that these clay pots are nothing but clay, and yet the formations, the nama-rupa, mm-hmm. that doesn't mean the nama-rupa is an illusion. They're real manifestations. You see?
Right.
But so that's the idea.
From the standpoint of the absolute and say this, there's only clay.
So now this is why mantra 8 is so important. Now, this is a perfect segue. Thank you, Purnima, for setting up mantra 8, because everything depends on the nature of ultimate reality. Right. And fundamentally, Shankara differs from Sri Aurobindo, Sri Ramakrishna, Swamiji on this point. Because according to Shankara, the ultimate reality is only non-dual, attributeless, pure consciousness, strictly impersonal. Nirguna Brahman is the term used. He uses the term actually Nirvishesha Brahman more often, but it means the same thing. Now, let's look at mantra 8, because how does Isa Upanishad explain the nature of ultimate reality? Because it's on the basis of the nature of ultimate reality that we arrive at this different kind of synthetic or comprehensive or integral Advaita. So I'll read the Sanskrit, then read Sri Aurobindo's translation. And we're going to go through this briefly and then get to these cryptic 9 to 14 verses. Saparyagat chukram akayam apranam asnaviram shuddhamapa apavidham kavir manishi paribhu swayambhu yatha tatyatorthan vyadadhat shashvati vyasama abhyah. It is he that has gone abroad, that which is bright, bodiless, without scar of imperfection, without sinews, pure, unpierced by evil. The seer, the thinker, the one who becomes everywhere. The self-existent has ordered objects perfectly according to their nature from years sempiternal. Now, how does Sri Aurobindo understand this verse? Again, he interprets this mantra from the standpoint of Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta. Sri Ramakrishna says a million times, Brahmo Shakti Abhed. Brahman and Shakti are inseparable, like fire and its power to burn. Ogniyartha Dahika Shakti. By Brahman, he means non-dual, attributeless pure consciousness, which is Shankara's ultimate reality. But what Shankara will not accept is that Sri Ramakrishna says that non-dual pure consciousness is abhed. It's inseparable from Shakti, the personal God, who creates, preserves, and destroys this world. Sri Ramakrishna would say, when I think of the ultimate reality as niskriya, as inactive, then I call it Brahman. When I think of that same ultimate reality as creating, preserving, and destroying this world, then I call it Kali or Shakti. Same reality, in its static aspect is non-dual pure consciousness, in its dynamic aspect is Shakti, personal God. Now, I think this is a really brilliant reading. Sri Aurobindo, what he does is he looks at the grammar, the grammatical form of the nouns used in the first line and then in the second line. And what he finds is, in the first line, Shukram, Akayam, Avranam, Asnaviram, Shuddham, Apapavidham. All of these are neuter gender. There are three genders in Sanskrit. There's masculine, feminine, and neuter, Napumsaka. All of these words are Napumsaka, neuter gender. What he's saying is, the neuter gender, all of these words are denoting impersonal, attributeless Brahman, Nirguna Brahman. Okay? That which is bright, bodiless, no imperfections, no sinews, pure, unpierced by evil, and so on. Next line, suddenly it shifts into the masculine gender. Kavihi, which beautiful words. It means poet. God is poet. Suddenly becomes personal. Manishi, the thinker. God is the thinker. Again, personal. Paribhu, the one who has become everything in this world. Very Vijnana, right? This kind of idea. Swayambhu, the self-existent. All of these are masculine gender. And the self-existent who has ordered objects perfectly according to their nature from years eternal. Clearly the creator God, who's ordering everything in this world on the basis of what? Presumably the doctrine of karma and so on and so forth. But he's created this entire world. So what he's saying is, the Isa Upanishad in this 8th mantra is teaching us a very expansive conception of ultimate reality as both Brahman and Shakti, using Sri Ramakrishna's terms, as both non-dual pure consciousness, denoted by the neuter gendered adjectives in the first line of the 8th mantra, and at the same time, it's the dynamic, loving, personal God who is not just the Lord of this world, who not only creates this world, but has become everything in this entire world. Paribhuhu means literally becoming everything in this world. And especially in the context of the previous mantra, which we just discussed, right? That Shakti has become all beings and all names and forms in this world. Okay? So it's equally personal and impersonal. That's the thing to keep in mind. Now we get to mantras 9 through 14. Let's look at the first triad of 9 through 11 first. As I said, extremely cryptic, and different commentators have interpreted these terms, the key terms, avidya and vidya, in many different ways. Let's look at, first of all, the Sanskrit and then Sri Aurobindo's translation. Mantra 9, andam tamah pravishanti ye avidyam upasate, tato bhuya ivate tamo yau vidyayam rataha. Into a blind darkness they enter who follow after the ignorance. They, as if into a greater darkness, who devote themselves to the knowledge alone. Let's pause here. Okay. Why is this so cryptic? Why is this so puzzling? There are a number of reasons, but the main reason, it seems to me, is anybody who studied any of the Upanishads will know that avidya, bad. Vidya, wonderful. Vidya is supposed to be the spiritual goal. We're supposed to try to get rid of avidya, ignorance. Through what? Through knowledge, through vidya. We gain knowledge of ultimate reality of the truth, the highest truth. Thereby we eradicate ignorance. Here, strangely, this mantra is saying, those who worship avidya, ignorance, enter into darkness, fine. Blindness, blinding darkness, that's no problem. That's consistent with all the other Upanishads. Now the second line, but those who worship vidya, knowledge, they enter as if into a greater darkness. This is genuinely strange. This is genuinely strange. And Shankara will have none of it. And so he has very different, he says we can't take these words in the literal sense. We have to take them in a different sense. How does he interpret them? What he says is, all of these mantras, 9 through 11 and 12 to 14, they don't address the highest spiritual aspirants, jnana yogis. They address inferior spiritual aspirants, manda adhikaris, who are only qualified for karma yoga and upasana, selfless action, and upasana means contemplation, meditation, okay? And we're about to find out on what. So now, how does Shankara understand? I think it's helpful to first understand Shankara's interpretation, then we can look at how radically different Sri Aurobindo's interpretation is of these mantras. And then you can decide, which do I find more plausible and why? Now, according to Shankara, avidya, what does avidya mean? It does not mean ignorance. It means Vedic rituals, karma. He uses the Sanskrit term karma, but he means by that Vedic rituals. Okay, if avidya means karma, what does vidya mean? Vidya, Shankara says, means meditation on minor deities. Devata jnana is the Sanskrit term here. So avidya means Vedic rites. Vidya means meditation on minor deities. So those who engage in Vedic rites, what happens to them? They enter into darkness. They get a kind of inferior result. They certainly don't get liberation. They're very far from liberation. What about those who meditate on minor deities, devatas? What happens to them? Those who practice vidya, they enter as if into a greater darkness. It's also not a great result, okay? Because it's not the highest goal of liberation. So now, Shankara, let's go to mantra 10 and then 11, and then we can talk about the rest of Shankara's interpretation. Then we can go to Sri Aurobindo's. So, mantra 10. Anyad eva ahuhu vidyaya. Anyad ahuhu avidyaya. Iti shushma dhiranam ye nastad vichachakshide. And then 11. Vidyam cha avidyam cha yastad vedo bhayam saha. Avidyaya mrityum titva vidyaya amritam ashnute. Vidyaya amritam ashnute. I'm breaking the sandhi. Now, mantra 10. Sri Aurobindo's translation. Other, verily it is said, is that which comes by the knowledge. Other, that which comes by the ignorance. This is the lore we have received from the wise who revealed that to our understanding. Now, mantra 11. He who knows that as both in one, the knowledge and the ignorance, by the ignorance crosses beyond death, and by the knowledge enjoys immortality. Now, mantra 11 specifically, okay? Well, I'll explain both actually. Mantras 10 and 11. Shankara takes 10 to say, if you only practice Vedic rites, you're not going to attain a very high goal, spiritual goal. If you only practice contemplation of these minor deities, you will also not achieve a very great goal. Mantra 11 then says, according to Shankara, therefore, inferior spiritual aspirants should combine both. They should combine karma yoga, the practice of Vedic rites, and upasana in order to attain better results, which is still not the highest goal. He says that this immortality, amritam, which literally means immortality, or nectar actually, it means both things at the same time. He says it's a merely relative immortality. This is not the highest immortality of liberation from rebirth. It's a relative immortality, but if you combine these two things, you get a better result in the end. You become what? You become one with these minor deities. You become like an Indra or a Prajapati. Devata Atma Bhavam. Okay? Parik ji, please mute your audio. Thank you. Okay. So that's Shankara's interpretation. Now, to understand how radically different Sri Aurobindo's interpretation is from Shankara's, we need to have some understanding of some of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. Okay? I think the most helpful here is, of course, always keeping in mind Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta, his teachings on the spiritual state of Vijnana. Now, this is on the second page of the class 3 handout. Okay? Sri Ramakrishna says, Rama said, brother, go beyond both knowledge, the Bangla term here is jnana, and ignorance, ajnana. So notice, like in the Upanishad, the terms vidya and avidya are used. Here he's using jnana and ajnana, very similar. Then Sri Ramakrishna says something startling. He who has knowledge has ignorance also. If a thorn has entered your foot, get another thorn, and with its help, take out the first. Then throw away the second also. This is startling in the same way that mantra 9 should be startling to anybody who reads it, saying, yes, of course, if you are ignorant, if you worship ignorance, you'll fall into darkness. But wait a minute, how can worshiping knowledge, how can having knowledge also lead to as if a greater darkness? Exactly like that. Sri Ramakrishna is startlingly telling M, even knowledge is it's not good enough. You have to throw away, you have to remove the thorn of ignorance by means of the thorn of knowledge. Ultimately, you have to throw away both thorns. And so M is completely astonished. She says, should one throw away both knowledge and ignorance? This is unheard of. Sri Ramakrishna, yes, that is why one should acquire vijnana. You see, he who is aware of light is also aware of darkness. What is vijnana? It is knowing God in a special way. The realization that God alone has become the universe and all living beings is vijnana. So now, it seems to me that Sri Aurobindo is one of the only commentators on the Isa Upanishad I'm aware of who interprets these very cryptic mantras, 9 through 11, and then we'll see in a little bit, mantras 12 to 14, from the standpoint of Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta. Okay? Because Sri Aurobindo says, Vidya, the term Vidya in these mantras 9 through 11 means the consciousness of unity. The one ultimate divine truth or reality, whatever that is, however we understand that. And avidya means the consciousness of multiplicity, nanatva. So ekatva, the knowledge of ekatva versus the knowledge of nanatva. Multiplicity, all the different names and forms, right? And so Sri Aurobindo interprets this very much along the lines of Sri Ramakrishna's thorn analogy. He says, the ignorant person is the one who looks upon this world as just full of different discrete names and forms. There's a laptop, there's a computer, there are pictures, there's a table, there are people, there are animals, and so on and so forth. This ignorant person is not seeing any oneness anywhere. There's no question of God manifesting as this multiplicity. He doesn't see the one divine truth behind this multiplicity or in the multiplicity. By contrast, so that's why he falls into a darkness, okay? The person who is suffering from ignorance is suffering from darkness. He's in darkness. What does that mean? He doesn't have knowledge of unity, of the one divine highest truth. What about the vidya? Vidya is consciousness of unity at the expense of the multiplicity. What does that look like? It's something like, if you attain, according to classical Advaita, if you attain the state of nirvikalpa samadhi, Sri Ramakrishna would say, it's like a salt doll that goes to measure the depth of the ocean. The moment it sets foot in the ocean, what happens? The salt doll melts into the ocean, right? In the state of nirvikalpa samadhi, you lose all external consciousness. You are not aware of this world. And you are not even aware of the personal God, Shakti. You become one with non-dual pure consciousness. There's no subject-object duality at all. In that sense, there's a consciousness of unity, which means the one reality, which is your own nature as non-dual pure consciousness. I think Nirvikalpa Samadhi is a good example of what Sri Aurobindo means by consciousness of unity. That excludes the multiplicity and that excludes Shakti. In the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, one does not perceive Shakti, one does not perceive any multiplicity, doesn't perceive this world of names and forms. And on that basis, what classical Advaitins say is, in this highest state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you only perceive your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. Therefore, the fact that you don't perceive Shakti and the fact that you don't perceive any names and forms means that they are not the ultimate truth, that they are not ultimately real. The only reality is non-dual, attributeless pure consciousness. All names and forms are illusory appearances. Even Shakti, the personal God, is also a lower reality. It's an inferior truth. Now, by contrast, what does Sri Aurobindo say? He says this is a mistake. And this is a quotation that's on the handout, okay? Let me skip the first quotation and then go to the second one. He says, those who are devoted entirely to the principle of indiscriminate unity and seek to put away from them the integrality of the Brahman, also put away from them knowledge and completeness and enter as if into a greater darkness. They enter into some special state and accept it for the whole, mistaking exclusion in consciousness for transcendence in consciousness. This is a very subtle sentence here, and I think it needs a lot of unpacking. Now, what does he mean? I think he has in mind different targets, okay? But one target is classical Advaitins, I think, okay? I think he's thinking of these classical Advaitins who think that being in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the highest goal, ideally leaving the body in that state, because good riddance to this unreal body. What's the problem? They only see the truth in their true nature as non-dual, attributeless, pure consciousness when they turn away from this world and when they turn away from the personal God. And only in this special state, by this special state, I think one of the things he has in mind is Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, what happens? We're the salt doll which is melted in the ocean. There's just non-dual pure consciousness. Now, he says the mistake that these classical Advaitins make is to mistake exclusion in consciousness for transcendence in consciousness. What does he mean by this? My understanding is the following. In the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, this world of names and forms is excluded from our perception. In the same state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the personal God is excluded from our perception, which means we're not perceiving the personal God, we're not perceiving this world of names and forms. If and when a Jivan Mukta comes back from the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, they will conclude from their experience in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, oh, I realized the highest truth in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. My true nature is non-dual pure consciousness, and I didn't perceive this world of names and forms, and I didn't perceive the personal God. Therefore, they must be illusions. So therefore, I will look upon this entire world of names and forms as a dream. This is what Sri Ramakrishna says. He says the Jnani looks upon this world as a framework of illusion, as a dream. Whereas the Vijnani looks upon it as a mansion of mirth. So what Sri Aurobindo says is the mistake that these classical Advaitins make is to think that just because the personal God and names and forms are not perceived in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, therefore they don't exist. Therefore they must be an illusion. Whereas what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, what Sri Aurobindo is saying, is that they fully accept the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. They fully embrace it. They say, yes, it's a special spiritual state in which you realize your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. And you definitely do not perceive the personal God in that state. You definitely don't perceive this world of names and forms. You completely lose external consciousness in this state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But don't conclude from that the personal God is unreal and that this world of names and forms is unreal. If I do this, will I see the laptop in front of me? No. Does it mean the laptop is unreal? No. It means that in my current state of perception, I don't see the laptop. Right? But Sri Ramakrishna says, the Vijnani, after attaining jnana, he uses this metaphor of a staircase and a roof, and he says, he realizes that the steps are made of the same material as the roof, bricks lining brick dust. So that reality which the Vijnani has realized as Brahman in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, non-dual pure consciousness, he realizes that also is Shakti. And that Shakti is playfully manifesting as all the names and forms in this world. That's what I think Sri Aurobindo means by the integrality of the Brahman. What does integrality mean? Integrality means all-encompassing. So this is a Brahman that encompasses everything. Okay? Brahma Shakti Satyam Jagat Satyam. That's the way I put it. As opposed to Shankara's Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. It's the ultimate reality is not just non-dual Brahman, but also Shakti, the personal God, and Jagat Satyam. Jagat is Satyam not as just names and forms, but the names and forms are real manifestations of Shakti. Okay? So now, mantra 11. How does Sri Aurobindo then interpret mantra 11? In a very innovative way. Let me read you his translation again. He who knows that, with a capital T, that ultimate reality, as both in one, the knowledge and the ignorance, by the ignorance crosses beyond death, and by the knowledge enjoys immortality. Now, what is he saying? He says, therefore, the ideal, the spiritual ideal, is to combine avidya with vidya. Combine the knowledge of this multiplicity, this world of names and forms, with the knowledge of oneness. If you do that, what happens? You realize the integral Brahman, which is Brahma Shakti, the impersonal, personal, divine reality or divine Purushottama, and you realize that this world of multiplicity is not a dream, it's not an illusion, but it's a real manifestation of Shakti. So you have to combine the knowledge of multiplicity with the knowledge of oneness. When you do that, when you attain this very heightened spiritual state of Vijnana, you attain the ultimate immortality, Amritam, of total spiritual fulfillment. Because you perceive God not just in Nitya, in the Nitya, the eternal non-dual Brahman, pure consciousness, in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you equally perceive God as Shakti and as God's Shakti's Leela. So the Vijnani can go from the Nitya to the Leela and back from the Leela up to the Nitya, seeing everything as the same divine. That's the idea. And so the way I summarize Sri Aurobindo's interpretation of mantras 9 through 11 is as follows. He says, avidya leads to darkness. Kind of obvious. The Sanskrit formula would be the reverse of Shankara, which is Jagat Satyam Brahma Mithya. Okay? This world of names and forms is real, but I don't see any Brahman. I don't believe in Brahman. There's no God. There's no pure consciousness, nothing like that. No ultimate reality. There's just discrete names and forms. Laptop, table, tree, dog, and so on and so forth. Vidya, by contrast, leads as if to an even greater darkness. What is Vidya? This corresponds, at least partially, to Shankara's classical Advaita Vedanta, which Sri Aurobindo calls an exclusive or an illusionistic monism. What's the Sanskrit formula? It's the famous formula we all know. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Non-dual pure consciousness alone is real. This world of names and forms, therefore unreal. What does Sri Aurobindo say? We need to combine these two things, these two standpoints, these two spiritual standpoints, in order to arrive at the greatest, highest spiritual fulfillment of Amrita, immortality, the immortal nectar of bliss. What is that? Vijnana. And remember, the word Vijanataha is used in mantra 7. So he's not just randomly using the word Vijnana here. He's thinking of the word Vijanataha in mantra 7. What does Vijnana stand for? Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam, or Brahma Shakti Satyam Jagat Satyam. Because the ultimate reality is both Brahman and Shakti, this world is a real manifestation of Shakti. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Does anyone have questions before we move on to mantras 12 through 14? There's a lot there. So any questions?
Sangeeta, go ahead.
Yes.
Pranam Maharaj.
Namaste.
So I just wanted to, sorry, I again couldn't join before 7:30 because I had another conflict. But I just listened to this amazing description you told about the mantra 11. Now, at this context, if I may please ask you, how would you define real? What would you say?
Yeah, that which exists.
Sat.
I don't know. Sanskrit terms are notoriously ambiguous. If you ask me the meaning of an English word, so I'm giving you an English rendering. What does real mean? That which exists. What does unreal mean? That which does not exist.
Okay, and the existence of something is what we would ascertain as something that is not in contradiction to what the senses can perceive. Would that be fair?
I'm not sure. Can you reformulate the question? Because I'm not even sure I understand it.
Sure. So in this context, then, existence would be something that is not in contradiction to what the senses can perceive. In the sense, if my senses can perceive something,
it could be. It could be in contradiction. We're not perceiving. I mean, yeah, it depends on what you mean by contradicting. I mean, nobody can perceive Brahman or God, the personal God, with their senses. But that doesn't mean that God or non-dual Brahman contradicts what we perceive with the senses. Is that what you mean? I mean, what do you mean by contradicting the senses?
Sorry. So what I meant was when we are trying to give a definition to that which exists, so we define something to be existing based on either the entirety of what our senses can perceive or what we know by knowledge, or both.
I don't know, again, by knowledge and what. See, the point is, in Indian philosophy, they have different brahmanas, which means means of knowledge, okay? One of them, the first one, which is foundational and which all the different schools of Indian philosophy accept, is what's called pratyaksha, okay? But the spiritual schools of Indian philosophy define pratyaksha broadly to encompass two kinds of perception. Pratyaksha literally means direct perception. But there are two kinds. One is indriyaja pratyaksha, which means sense perception, the five senses, anything perceived through the five senses. But they also accept yogaja pratyaksha, yoga ja pratyaksha, which means perception born of yogic knowledge. Which means what? The knowledge of rishis, of the great sages. Both are equally knowledge. So that's why I'm a little bit hesitant to give direct answers to your question, because I think we need to be careful about the way you're framing the question. Does that make sense?
Right. So I was just trying to understand how will you,
So
define
now,
something
all
exists.
these spiritual schools of Indian philosophy will say
Mhm.
that which exists is that which is obtainable, that which can be known through the pramanas, okay? Through any of the pramanas. I only mentioned the first one, which is perception, but that includes both sense perception and yogic perception, spiritual experience. Does that make sense?
Perfect.
Which means, yeah, okay, great. That's a very good question. Thank you. And other questions before we move on to mantras 12 to 14?
I do have one question as well.
Who is this?
Sorry, I couldn't raise my hand. This is Anisha.
Hi, Anisha, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit confused about, in the Yoga Sutras, the final state is Samadhi, which is also one of the states in the Samadhi is Nirvikalp Samadhi. So how is that different from the Advaitic Brahman? When you see the Brahman, that's eternal consciousness. So how is that different?
Okay, if I understand your question correctly, how is the highest state of samadhi in Patanjali's yoga philosophy different from the Nirvikalpa Samadhi of Advaita Vedanta? Is that right?
Yes.
Right. It's a good question. I mean, it's more in it would be more in the context of Yoga Sutras, but I'll give a brief answer, which is in yoga philosophy, the term Nirvikalpa Samadhi is never used, actually. The term Asampragyata Samadhi is the highest goal. Okay. So the question, I think a better formulation, a more precise formulation of the question would be, how is the yogic Asampragyata Samadhi different from the classical Advaitic Nirvikalpa Samadhi? And the answer becomes very subtle and technical, but one of the main differences is the following. In Sankhya and yoga philosophy, there are multiple Purushas. You have one Purusha, I have a distinct Purusha, and Purnima has a third distinct Purusha. When you attain the state of Asampragyata Samadhi, according to yoga philosophy, you realize yourself as the Anisha Purusha. When I attain the state of Asampragyata Samadhi, I realize my Medhananda Purusha. But they're not the same Purusha, they're distinct Purushas. And I realize that I have nothing to do with Prakriti, nature. Now, Nirvikalpa Samadhi in classical Advaita Vedanta is radically non-dual. There's only one non-dual Atman, one non-dual pure consciousness. Your pure consciousness is not distinct from my pure consciousness. There's only one non-dual.
Even in the experience, you can tell the difference. Is it, or is it just?
That's I don't know. If you've had the experience, you can tell me, but I haven't, so I can't tell you. But anyone who has, I believe that all of these great spiritual philosophies are based on profound spiritual realizations. So I think that Patanjali, he's not just randomly as an intellectual hypothesis teaching that there are multiple Purushas. I think that he's teaching them on the basis of his own highest spiritual experience. And I think Shankara is teaching the reality of non-dual pure consciousness on the basis of his own distinct Advaitic Nirvikalpa Samadhi experience. That's my own opinion, but that could be disputed. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question I had. When you talk about Brahma Shakti Abhed and Shakti, being Brahman manifesting as Shakti and the Vijnani can see it, how is it different? Or maybe I should say it seems a little bit similar to Kashmiri Shaivism or Tantra because in Sri Ramakrishna's teaching, he does
yes, no, that's a good question. Yes. So the thing is, there's a reason why Sarupanji is fond of quoting Arindam Chakraborty, who is one of the greatest living scholars of Indian philosophy. Arindam Chakraborty was a friend of both of us, a mutual friend. Arindam says, if you really want to understand Sri Ramakrishna's teachings in the Kathamrita, in the gospel, better to study Kashmiri Shaivism than to study Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. Because Sri Ramakrishna's teachings come much closer to Kashmiri Shaivism than to Shankara's classical Advaitic teachings. That doesn't mean that his teachings are identical to Kashmiri Shaivism. But the things that you bring up, which is that Brahman and Shakti are inseparable, very tantric, very Kashmiri Shaivite. Because Kashmiri Shaivism teaches that ultimate reality is Prakasha Vimarshamaya, which means it's not just pure consciousness, but it's also Shakti. It's Shiva Shakti. And this world is a real manifestation of Shiva Shakti. That's also one of the fundamental Kashmiri Shaivite tantric doctrines. Sri Ramakrishna will accept that. Is it a coincidence? Absolutely not. His Ishtadevata was Kali, a tantric goddess. One of his first gurus was a tantric guru. And then, Bhairavi Brahmani was also a tantric, and then also the Kali mantra he got was also from a tantric, and so Kenaram Bhattacharya. So these are not coincidences. He was saturated with tantric philosophy, had tantric realizations, And he also had Vedantic realizations and so on and so forth. And so that's not a coincidence. He learned from all these traditions and then had many different kinds of spiritual experiences. Yes. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a wonderful question. Okay. Anyone else have a question before we move on to one?
Yeah,
Yes.
I have one question.
Yes,
So
please, Prem.
you mentioned that Vidya, according to Shankara, refers to Vedic rituals, right? And you also mentioned that it's a form of Adhikari. Shankara alluded to Adhikari Beta, that it
Yeah, correct.
it refers to individual aspirants, Manda Adhikaris, right?
Yes.
So where explicitly, like how did you come to that conclusion, and is that reference
Okay,
anywhere?
I can just try to find, 1 second. I'll try to find it very quickly. Okay. Okay. Mantra 9. We can look at, I'm just opening Gambhiranji's translation. Okay, so basically, one thing about Shankara's commentary, this is a kind of tip on how you should read Shankara's commentaries. It's always dangerous to read just his commentary on that particular mantra. You have to read the surrounding, his commentary just preceding the mantra, and then ideally his commentary on the whole, on the Upanishad as a whole, actually. That's what gets complicated. So in this case, the very end of his commentary on the previous mantra, what he says is, and I'll just read part of it. He says, none but a fool will wish to combine with any work or with any other knowledge, meaning knowledge in the sense of meditation, upasana, that knowledge of the oneness of the self that has been imparted to the passionless man after the eradication of the distinction of all ends and means by the text, when to the man of realization all beings become the very self, then what delusion and what sorrow can there be for that seer of oneness? This is mantra 7. So what he's saying is mantra 7 is talking about the jnani, the realized soul from the standpoint of classical Advaita Vedanta. And then he says, it makes no sense for the same Upanishad to be prescribing to the same person who's realized the oneness of the non-dual self, to then engage in Vedic rites and in upasana, contemplation. He says, but the condemnation of the ignorant, etc., is done here with the view to achieving a combination of vidya, meaning worship or meditation, and karma, the Vedic rituals. And as to that, not the knowledge of the supreme self, but the thing, namely the divine possession, i.e. the meditation on the gods. That's what I explained as this upasana, this vidya, that can possibly be combined with the other factor, karma, has been spoken of here. So what can be combined with what? These two inferior spiritual practices, which is Vedic ritualism and contemplation on the minor deities. You cannot combine Vedic ritualism with the knowledge of Brahman. That's what he's saying. That's what cannot be combined. Logically and scripturally, as the associate of karma, since for this, vidya, in the sense of meditation or worship, a result different from the knowledge of Brahman has been declared thus. Okay, and so on and so forth. I mean, I could go on. It's very technical, but the whole point is, he says that all of these mantras, very explicitly, he says, are meant for Manda Adhikaris, inferior spiritual aspirants, who are only eligible for Vedic rituals and for this upasana, this meditation on the devatas. And he says that there are other mantras, number 1, number 8, and number 6 through 8, primarily those, actually, are meant for superior spiritual aspirants. And one thing to keep in mind, just as a kind of, if you're trying to be an unbiased reader of this Upanishad, one question to ask is it really plausible that in an Upanishad of 18 mantras, only 3 or 4 of them are meant for the highest spiritual aspirants, and that all the rest of them are meant for spiritual idiots, for inferior spiritual aspirants? So what Swamiji does, what Sri Aurobindo does, what Harshanandaji does, by the way, who's written a Sanskrit commentary in the light of our tradition on the Isa Upanishad called Viveka Sukhavardhini, is he says, read the Upanishad as a whole, take all the mantras as of a piece. So we don't have to, selectively say, based on my philosophy, the mantras that suit my philosophy are meant for the highest spiritual aspirants. The mantras that don't agree with my philosophy are meant for inferior spiritual aspirants. They all address everybody. This Vedanta is universal. This Upanishad is universal. It's appealing to everybody. So even the second mantra, which is Kurvan Neveha Karmani, Jijivichet Shataggasamaha, one should strive to live 100 years performing actions continuously. Why should that only apply to Mandadikaris? It applies to everybody across the world. This is the Ramakrishnan approach, as far as I can tell, and the Aurobindonian kind of approach. Yeah, thank you. So now, I do suggest that we get to mantras 12 to 14, and then we can hear the remaining questions. I'm happy to take more questions after that. So let me just finish. Okay, Mantras 12 to 14, equally cryptic, if not more cryptic. Andam tamaha pravishanti ye asambhutim upasate, tato bhuya ivate tamo yau sambhutyam rata. Mantra 12. Into a blind darkness they enter who follow after the non-birth. This is Sri Aurobindo's translation. They, as if into a greater darkness, who devote themselves to the birth alone. Mantra 13. Anyad eva ahuhu sambhavat. Anyad ahuhu asambhavat. Iti shushrumadhiranam yenastad vichachakshire. Sri Aurobindo's translation. Other, verily, it is said, is that which comes by the birth. Other, that which comes by the non-birth. This is the lore we have received from the wise who revealed that, capital T, that, to our understanding. 14. Sambhutim cha vinasham cha yastad veda ubhayam saha. I'm breaking the sandhi. Veda ubhayam saha. Vinashena mrityum titva sambhutyam amritam ashnute. Okay? Now, or sambhutya amritam ashnute. For those who know Sanskrit, sambhutya means by means of sambhuti. Amritam ashnute, one attains amritam, the immortal nectar. Okay? Now, if you're interested, I can talk later in the question and answer if you want to know about Shankara's translation or interpretation, but it's complicated. So I want to just jump straight into Sri Aurobindo's understanding first, at least. Okay. Now, how does Sri Aurobindo interpret this? Sambhuti he interprets as non-birth. Asambhuti as non-birth. Asambhuti means non-birth. Okay. By contrast, sambhuti he interprets as rebirth or birth or rebirth, which means what? You are born into a body. You're also reborn again and again in multiple human bodies. Asambhuti, by contrast, he's thinking of that reality which is never born, the unborn with a capital U. What is that? The self. Look at chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. Again and again, it's talking about ajopi sannavyayatma ajaha, the unborn, non-dual Atman, self, right? In that sense. Sri Aurobindo is taking asambhuti in that sense and sambhuti as this world of becoming in a broad sense. Things that come and go, arise, disintegrate, disappear, things that are born, things that die, right? One thing that's interesting about Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Isa Upanishad is that in certain places he brings up a really crucial doctrine mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan Krishna distinguishes three Purushas. And I'm teaching a class with some of you are attending on Bhagavad Gita and the light of Sri Ramakrishna, so you'll know this actually. The doctrine of the triple Purusha. Kshara Purusha, Akshara Purusha, and Purushottama. Sri Aurobindo says the Purushottama, the supreme Purusha, the Uttama Purusha, is the impersonal, personal divine reality. Okay? So what Sri Ramakrishna would say is Brahman and Shakti. So Brahma Shakti. That divine, impersonal, personal Purushottama manifests as both Kshara Purusha and Akshara Purusha. Kshara Purusha is this world of multiplicity, this world of becoming. God, this Purushottama actually manifests, genuinely manifests, playfully manifests as all names and forms and as all individual souls, as all beings. At the same time, that same Purushottama manifests as Akshara Brahman, Akshara Purusha, which is what? Non-dual pure consciousness of classical Advaita Vedanta. You see? So now, another way of thinking about how Sri Aurobindo is understanding the terms asambhuti and sambhuti in mantras 12 to 14 of the Isa Upanishad is asambhuti corresponds to Akshara Purusha of the Bhagavad Gita, according to Sri Aurobindo's interpretation. It is the non-dual pure consciousness or non-dual self with a capital S of classical Advaita Vedanta, more or less, whereas sambhuti, birth, corresponds to the Kshara Purusha. Kshara Purusha is the divine Purushottama manifesting as this entire world of names and forms and as all the beings that we see. Everything that is sentient, everything that is insentient. So seeing God in the multiplicity is Sambhuti. Well, no, actually, it's a little more complicated. Like the consciousness of Vidya and Avidya, right? Like that. The first position is you just see the world of multiplicity without the oneness. So that's the Sambhuti. That's why they end up in darkness. So they enter into greater darkness who only see this world of multiplicity at the expense of the unborn self. The others who perceive the non-dual self in a state like Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but who exclude this world of multiplicity, what happens to them? They enter as if into a greater darkness, in the sense of they enter into a kind of special state of darkness, like a Nirvikalpa Samadhi state, in which they lose sight of the divine in this world of multiplicity. Okay, and then this the 14th mantra, Sambhutim cha vinasham cha. This is very tricky for other reasons, because now the Upanishad itself uses the term vinasham as a synonym for asambhuti. So that's the one clue that the Upanishad gives us as to the meaning of asambhuti. It's saying asambhuti is vinasham. What is vinasham? Literally means destruction. So what Sri Aurobindo does is, ingeniously, is he interprets this word destruction to mean what? Destruction of ego. Destruction of the small I, egoism. And he says that's a precondition for attaining direct spiritual knowledge of asambhuti, which is the unborn, non-dual self. Okay, and so he gives this very interesting interpretation. And then, like he did with mantras 9 through 11, he says the ideal, the spiritual ideal, is not to just look at this world of multiplicity. You're going to end up in the darkness of ignorance if you do that. You're just going to see the multiplicity without the divine oneness. The ideal is also not just merging like a salt doll into non-dual pure consciousness and seeing this world as a dream and dismissing the personal God. He says you've also missed the highest goal if you do that. The ideal, the spiritual ideal, is to combine consciousness of Kshara Purusha with Akshara Purusha, seeing the divine not just as the non-dual self, this transcendental self, which Shankara teaches, but seeing the divine equally in this world of becoming, in this world of multiplicity. That's the higher, greater spiritual fulfillment. That is the state of the Vijnani. That's why the Vijnani is the one who attains the Amrita, the true Amrita of, Sri Ramakrishna uses a nice example. He says, there's these two ladies who are, they make things out of yarn. They knit. They love knitting. It's like their profession. Or maybe it's a hobby. I don't know. I don't think he specified. So one of these knitters comes to the other lady friend's house. And that second knitter, the guest, sees a really beautiful ball of yarn. And she starts to covet it. She wants it for herself. So she wants to steal it. So she's thinking of a way. So she waits for her friend to turn around. When she's not looking, or she thinks she's not looking, she slips it under her armpit. But the friend noticed, the one who invited her noticed that she's hiding this ball of yarn under her armpit. So she comes up with a plan. She says, come, let's dance together. Let's dance and enjoy. I'm in a good mood. Let's dance to this. So she holds her hands and they starts dancing. And this poor lady is dancing like with one arm raised and the other one is kind of like this, protecting the ball of yarn. Otherwise, the ball of yarn is going to fall out of her armpit. Sri Ramakrishna likens the Jnani to that lady, the visiting lady who steals the ball of yarn. In other places, that's a metaphor, but in other places, he says it just plain blank. He says, Jnanis are selfish. He says they're full of fear. Bhayatorashe. Fear. How can a Jnani be in fear? The person who has realized the true nature of non-dual pure consciousness, you know what inspires fear in them? This world. So the way I like to think about it from a philosophical standpoint is the following. And if you want details, there's a wonderful academic article written by Lance Nelson on Jivan Mukti in Advaita Vedanta and why classical Advaita Vedanta, followers of Shankara, have an enormously difficult time justifying Jivan Mukti, the state of liberation while still in the physical body. Okay, here's the problem. Okay, this whole world of names and forms is an illusion. It's an illusory appearance. Jivan Mukta, the Jivan Mukti, the one who is liberated while still in the physical body, is a standing contradiction. He's supposed to have the full knowledge of Brahman, that is true nature's non-dual pure consciousness. He's supposed to have completely eradicated all ignorance, right? And at the same time, he's still supposed to be in the physical body, and he's still supposed to be perceiving this world of names and forms. Even if he looks upon this world as a dream, still, this whole world is a product of ignorance. Even the physical body of the Jivan Mukta is also a product of ignorance. So if his ignorance has been completely eliminated, he should not be in a physical body anymore. So now, classical Advaitins themselves accept this logic. I'm not just telling you as a critic of Advaita Vedanta. Madhusudana Saraswati, some of the greatest stalwarts in Shankara's in post-Shankara classical Advaita, Chitsukha, and so on and so forth. What do they say? They say, therefore, because that's the case, we have to posit, even in the Jivan Mukta, an avidya lesha, a trace of ignorance, which explains why the Jivan Mukta continues to be in a physical body and continues to see this world, this dream world of names and forms. Okay, I think that what Sri Ramakrishna means when he says that jnanis are full of fear, and that this lady with the hiding the ball of yarn under her arm and only dancing with one arm up, I think what he means is the jnani is only happy in the state of the nitya. The moment he enters into this world of lila, fear. Because seeing this world is a standing insult to him. It's telling him you haven't attained the highest knowledge. You still have that trace of ignorance left in you. Let me explain the same thing in a different way, okay? Using the analogy of dream. I want to distinguish three different states. One is I'm dreaming and I don't know I'm dreaming. The vast majority of human beings, when they enter into a dream, they don't know they're dreaming. They only know they're in a dream after they come out of the dream, right? That's the state of ignorance. Second state, I am in the dream, but I know I'm dreaming. This is what's called lucid dreaming. I'm lucidly dreaming in the dream. I'm dreaming, but I know it's a dream. That's equivalent to the state of the Jivan Mukta. Jivan Mukta in classical Advaita Vedanta. The Jivan Mukta is in a physical body, but knows the physical body is unreal. He sees this world of names and forms, but knows it to be unreal. But he's still stuck in the dream. The third and higher state, the highest state, is waking up from the dream. Waking up from the dream is the state of Videha Mukti, which means good riddance to this physical body. Thank God I'm dead. Now I have even that little trace of ignorance that kept me in this dream body, in this dream world, has now been eliminated. I'm now dead. And now what's left? Non-dual pure consciousness. I've woken up from the dream. The highest goal, according to classical Advaita, is waking up from the dream, not just lucidly dreaming. Therefore, so long as you're in the dream, you're in fear, because you're always being reminded, constantly reminded of that trace of ignorance. There's still a fear. Totapuri, still meditating all day. Why is he? Sri Ramakrishna asked him, why are you doing that? You're supposed to have attained the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And he said that, well, because if you don't keep scrubbing a pot, it gets rusty. And then Sri Ramakrishna said, but what if the pot is made of gold? Then can it ever rust? If you see this whole world of Leela as God, what do you have to fear? What can you possibly fear if you see both the Nitya and the Leela as God, as divine? So Sri Ramakrishna would liken the Vijnani as the person who dances with both hands raised. Free. You're free in the Nitya, you're equally free in the Leela. You have nothing to fear. Okay, now, any questions? Let's wrap it up with any questions you might have. This is very good, but now I'm sure you have some questions. So please.
Hand
Yeah.
up.
Yes, Pranam Maharaj. Thank you. So
Thank
yes.
you.
So my question is on Sri Ramakrishna's, the thing that you just mentioned, that he says Gyanis are full of fear. So can I know the reference and the context for it? That's the first part.
Okay.
And the second part is, like you mentioned, he does say that, what if the pot is made of gold? Would you still need to do that? Now I'm trying to understand, how would we, if we were to take that as, the essence of what he's saying, how would we interpret in his own life when even after having the darshan of Ma Kali and even seeing her as real as, like he says, when he's talking to Swami, he still continues to chant her name, he still continues to plead to her, he still continues to act like a regular bhakta that has not seen her yet, right? So then how is this any different from Totapuri still meditating after understanding this? Can you please clarify?
Okay, sure. So for the reference, I can just send it to you later. I don't want to waste valuable time by, it's just in the gospel and I can send that to you.
Sure.
He's contrasting the Jnani with the Vijnani and saying in that context that the Jnani has fear versus the Vijnani.
Is he mainly speaking to the householders, Maharaj, when he's doing that?
He's speaking to everybody. I mean, even there are some future monastic disciples who are also in the room.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, now the second thing. Say very quickly again, what is the... okay. You see a kind of parallel between Totapuri continuing to meditate post Nirvikalpa Samadhi, with Sri Ramakrishna continuing to worship Kali after attaining the realization of God and after Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
After having a
Nirvikalpa Samadhi.
darshan of Ma Kali, after realizing Ma Kali or having
Right.
a darshan.
Okay, great. So now here's the thing. The key is there's a fundamental difference in these two philosophical paradigms. That's what I think is important to understand. Totapuri's fundamental philosophical paradigm is classical Advaita Vedanta. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahma Vinapara. Okay? From this standpoint, once you have attained the highest goal in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you realize that everything is not everything. You realize that the only truth is your own nature as non-dual pure consciousness, and everything else is unreal, right? Now, Sri Ramakrishna is puzzled when he sees Totapuri meditating. He's saying, well, isn't the meditation unreal? Isn't the object of what are you meditating on? And isn't the mind itself unreal? So why in the world are you meditating? You've realized the highest goal. You know all this is a dream anyway. I see it, I mean, of course, there are many ways of interpreting why Sri Ramakrishna is asking this question. This is one of the ways that I see it, okay? By contrast, you ask, why is it that after Sri Ramakrishna realizes Kali, why is he still worshiping her? What will he do once you realize Mother Kali as a living reality, more real to you than even your own kith and kin? How could you not worship Kali?
I mean, worshiping idol, Maharaj. Like, why would he still sit in?
Because he sees the idol as Mother Kali, as the luminous manifestation of Kali. You know, in the beginning of Gospel, toward the beginning, M tells Sri Ramakrishna, don't you think we should tell people who believe in idol worship that the truth, that these idols are not God? And Sri Ramakrishna gives him a severe scolding.
Right.
You Calcutta people, always lecturing to other people, but you yourselves are ignorant fools. And then he adds, this is really important. He says, why are you calling the idol as made of clay? Why do you call it a clay image? It is Chinmoy Murti, something along the lines. He says, it is consciousness embodied. Do you think he's seeing a clay image? No, he's seeing Mother Kali manifest as the image. That's the whole point of, in our Hindu pujas, we do this prana pratishtha, where we literally we invoke the deity in the divine image. Then it's not an image anymore, it's a luminous manifestation of the divine. Yeah, thank you.
So I think the distinction is because Totapuri doing what actions he was doing after his claimed realization goes against his very philosophy of what, you know, he terms as real and unreal, whereas Sri Ramakrishna continuing to do the sadhana even after his realization is a part of...
It's not sadhana, Sangeeta, that's not sadhana. It doesn't make sense to call it sadhana. Sadhana means spiritual practice. He doesn't have anything to gain from it.
Right, true.
It's just, if you love somebody intensely and that person is always with you, won't you express your love to that person? Surely you will.
So what would you term it, Maharaj? That was just his way of being?
Prema. I mean, he is, you know, Anirvachaniya Prema Swarupa is Swamiji's beautiful definition of God. This was, and then somebody asked Swamiji once, how do you look upon Sri Ramakrishna? He says, Love personified. The embodiment of Prema, nothing but love. He's the expression of love, and that's what's being expressed in worshiping Kali. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Maharaj, I have a question. So if Ramakrishna said this to his guru, Totapuri, about why would he meditate after Nirvikalpa Samadhi?
Yes.
Swami Vivekananda meditated until his last day.
Yeah, good. Very good question. Now, this gets really tricky. Not just that, Swamiji also lost his temper with his brother disciples once in a while. He smoked, and he called it a weakness from his college days. In his lectures on practical Vedanta, he's talking about the oneness of all beings. And then he adds, because he's so honest and frank, he said, some of you might be wondering, am I vegetarian? He says, I'm not vegetarian. I eat meat. But that's my own weakness. So all these things, you're like, what the heck? How could he be a realized soul and at the same time admit his own? How can he have these kinds of weaknesses? Now, Swami Atmapriyanandaji, who was the head of the Vivekananda University, where I joined, and I was a brahmachari and then a sadhu for many years, for 11 years. he had a nice way of explaining this. I like this. Whether you accept it or not, I don't know, but I'm just handing it on a platter to you and you decide. What he said is this: Sri Ramakrishna was a most unusual guru, because most gurus will pray that their disciples gain spiritual knowledge. And Sri Ramakrishna did exactly the opposite with Swamiji. He prayed intensely with tears in his eyes to Mother Kali to make sure that there always remains this veil of Maya shrouding the highest knowledge from Swamiji until he completes Mother's work, because otherwise he will leave the physical body. And so the way that Aprapiyananda understands this, he says, of course, all the different little weaknesses, things you call weaknesses, are all the ways that the Divine Mother, Sri Ramakrishna, is keeping Swamiji tethered to this world and to the human body in order to do Mother's work. And so when Swamiji is meditating, it's because he himself doesn't realize that he is non-dual pure consciousness, because Sri Ramakrishna said again and again, the moment he realizes his true nature, he's going to leave his body in samadhi.
That's a good answer. Yes. I think some days before his death, somebody asked him and he said, yes, I've realized.
Exactly. And Sri Ramakrishna used the metaphor of a chest, a treasure chest. He says, I'm now locking that chest. He tells not in himself.
Correct.
And I won't open that chest up again for you until you complete Mother's work.
Right, right.
So I think that's the best answer, I think.
Yes, I like the answer. Thank you, Manoj. Prithvi, go ahead.
Yep. So I have a little comment on Ramakrishna ji's doing the Kali Upasana. So is it similar to eating sugar versus being sugar, right? So as a bhakta, we talk about like eating sugar, that is the way. So it is the same act, but actually different interpretation, right? So the Advaita basically Nirvikam Samadhi is being sugar, and Upasana is eating sugar. So I think it is not a Upasana. It is not a practice, but it is basically the way of existence. So
that's a nice way of putting it. Exactly. Like Sri Ramakrishna will say that bhaktas love to eat sugar, they don't want to become sugar. And after realizing God, which is realizing sugar, they want to continue to eat sugar constantly, right? Even in the eternal heaven, Swarga.
Perfect. And then I have a comment, very interesting, analogous. Thank you for this enlightening series, actually, right? Because I read this Zen, so to say, Zen saying is that in the beginning, mountains are mountains, rivers are rivers. Then after some times, mountains are not mountains and rivers are not rivers. And then finally, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. So I see a poetic equivalence in what we are talking here, right? So initially, it is from the point of the unenlightened person, where you are working from not from the point of your consciousness. So it is just mountains and rivers. Then you go to the middle part where mountains are not mountains, they are not real. And then finally you come to the Vijnani stage where mountains are mountains, but they are like illuminated by consciousness, right? So it is very interesting.
That's very nice. I like that analogy. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, Bhajananji uses a parabola metaphor and says, I mean, now I'm adapting it. It's not exactly what he says, but the lower left-hand trough of the parabola represents ajnana or avidya, because you just see multiplicity without the oneness. The peak of the parabola is this advaita nirvikapa samadhi. You gain knowledge of non-dual pure consciousness, but you look upon everything else as unreal. And then the right-hand trough of the same parabola is where you come back to the same world that you initially which you first saw as just the world, and then what you saw as a dream. And now you're seeing, wait a minute, there actually is a laptop. There actually are human beings. And yet, with the huge difference that you see them as different blissful, playful manifestations of the same divine reality. Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful. And one last question, because I have a meeting at 5:30 p.m. PST. So one last question. Going once, going twice.
Maharaj, can you just re-clarify Sambhuti? Because I got Asambhuti, but Sambhuti.
You got Asambhuti and you want to know what Sambhuti is? Or
Yes,
you got
Maharaj.
Sambhuti and you want to know what Asambhuti is?
No, I want to know what Sambhuti is.
Sambhuti is literally, he translated as birth with a capital B. And I take it to mean basically this world of becoming. This world in which things arise and pass away, otherwise known using the Gita's term in chapter 15 of the Gita, Kshara Purusha. Kshara means literally decaying, things that arise and pass away.
Okay,
And so that people who are just seeing that multiplicity, that world of becoming, without realizing what's eternal, they have missed the boat. But the highest are the Vijnanis who see the one in the multiplicity and as the multiplicity. That's Vijnana. Okay?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you so much. Purnima, all right, we have one question, time for one more question, but if it's a short one. But if anyone has one more question. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. Purnima, you take the call.
I think we're good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Both these sessions have been wonderful, stimulating, and it's made me think about things that I hadn't thought about before. And I hope they were equally stimulating and thought-provoking for you as well. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you guys again. My sincere prayers to Thakur Man Swamiji. May Mind Gym and also the Vedanta Study Circle of Boston thrive and prosper for many years to come.
Right.
Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Thank you, everyone.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
Maharaj.
Bye. Thank you for the wonderful questions. You guys
Jai
really
Ma.
made this a success. I mean, without you guys, it would have been a boring lecture. So thank you. And
Jai
hope to
Ma,
see you
Maharaj.
soon, Sangeeta, in New York again. Take care.
Yes, yes,
Jai Ma.
yeah. Jai Ma.
Jai Ma. Jai Ma.
Thanks, Purnima.
Thank you.